I've held off on making this video for 2 years because it might piss a lot of people off. I mean, who am I to go around telling masters that they've missed something? And it's the internet. You can get flamed for even the tiniest thing someone disagrees with. But the thing is, most Shaolin practitioners are missing a key piece of the puzzle, and the evidence is everywhere. Now, this might not include you, but it might. This is the story of Shaolin's forgotten stance and how it ruined Gong Bu. Each stance within Kung Fu exists for a reason. It allows you to do something that another stance does not. Understanding this is the key to unlocking the proper body mechanics and application of many movements. And herein lies the problem. These days, most teachers prefer rotational mechanics and will use a twist from Ma Bu to Gong Bu for both rear arm and front arm strikes. But this turn pulls the front shoulder back, opposite to the direction you're trying to strike. If you've ever struggled to get power in a front arm strike while switching from Ma Bu to Gong Bu, this is why. The squared hip position you get when twisting from Ma Bu is great for generating power for the rear hand, but not for the front. There are ways around this, pulling the shoulder back first or using Gun Shen Chong Chong, a rolling punch. And with a lot of practice, these have valid uses, but in many cases, these are just workarounds for body mechanics that don't work as well. The result is a slower, awkward movement, which is still not as powerful as it could be. So how did we get here? Well, the odd thing is, it's not even Gong Bu that's the problem. It's meant to be used with front arm strikes. The problem is the knock-on effect of that missing stance. Yao Bu. This is Yao Bu. This is Gong Bu. They look pretty similar, right? This is Gong Bu too. This is Yao Bu again. Can you tell the difference? There are a few elements, but we'll stick to the core ones. Gong Bu has the head over the front foot and the hips can be closed or open. Yao Bu has the head closer to the center of mass and the hips are closed. Remember, each stance exists for a reason, and one stance can't fulfill the use of two. When you use your full body weight to generate power from momentum, Gong Bu serves to catch you. This can either be with a lunge or with a large body movement like Heihu Toshin. Imagine falling forward. Gong Bu is the natural position that catches you. Notice that in both versions, your head, a large proportion of your mass, is over the front foot. Yao Bu, meanwhile, doesn't catch your weight. Instead, it generates power through core rotation and shortening of your stance, moving your center of mass forwards. So you could view Gong Bu as using the movement of your head and Yao Bu your core. But now we have a single stance, which almost always uses twisting and doesn't have the same shortening, meaning that it fails to replicate both uses properly. Even when you have movements which are clearly meant to use the weight catching mechanic, this new hybrid Gong Bu is used. Yao Bu is still practiced in villages around Songshan, and here you see the proper lunging mechanics of a front arm Gong Bu strike. So the disappearance of Yao Bu in certain lineages seems to be the catalyst for the change in Gong Bu. It's impossible to say for certain what happened, but I think there were two stages. We have to acknowledge that just as today, not every martial artist makes a good teacher, the same would have been true in the past. At some point, someone gets confused by these two stances. It's understandable. They look very similar, and the nuances may not have been articulated to them well enough. Around the same time, Duanda, or close-range combat, became increasingly popular. And indeed, to this day, Duanda mechanics, which use rotation to generate power, are the most prominent approach within Shaolin. Meanwhile, long fist mechanics, which use translational movement of your mass, and which are seen in older forms, became less popular. So our confused martial artist ends up with a muddied hybrid stance, which has a long position, but their weight in the middle. This stance is in turn taught to their students, and it spreads. This new hybrid stance means that the weight-catching lunge mechanic no longer works. People step out into Gong Bu and are planted firmly before the strike lands, meaning that there is very little power. Eventually, drawing on Duanda mechanics in an attempt to fix this, while still maintaining the same stance work used in their forms, they resort to the Ma Bu twist using rear arm strikes. At this point, it is the same stance after all. We can see this progression of technique in Shi Xing Quan. In the Tagao version of the form, which is supposedly older, this sequence is still done with a forward step and strike. But note how the foot is fully planted before the punch. The more common and more recent version of the form replaces these movements with the rolling punch. If we go back to even older versions of Qi Xing Quan, which include separate monkey, rooster, dragon, and tiger forms, we see the full lunge mechanic with a banshou. I suspect that early versions of the unified form may have used the full lunge with a punch, possibly similar to this Gong Bu running drill. Now the Gong Bu lunge also appears at the end of Qi Xing Quan, and interestingly, here there is variation in the newer version, there either being no replacement, a Gong Bu to Ma Bu twist, 2 rolling punches, or a rolling punch and then a lunge. It's the latter variation, which I've seen most commonly, that raises another possible contributing factor to the disappearance of proper lunging mechanics from many people's practice. Quite simply, it's difficult to do well. When you try to do it from Ji Xing Bu, this is even more difficult. And here is our second stage. I can easily imagine, faced with a lunging strike with no power from this position, someone decided to replace it with a tried and tested Ma Bu to Gong Bu twist in both instances. Then, since the last movement of the Tagao triple strike sequence isn't straightforward either, the whole thing was changed, leaving just 1 lunging front arm strike in a form that once had 5. So because of confusion over 2 similar stances, Yao Bu disappeared in certain lineages of Shaolin. In many cases, so too did the original Gong Bu. Now we have people all over the world who have never heard of Yao Bu, telegraph their strikes of footwork, and don't understand why they lack power in their front arm Gong Bu strikes. By losing Yao Bu, the essence of Gong Bu has been lost too. If you practice Shaolin, I'd urge you to bring this distinction back into your training and see what a big difference it makes. Distinguish which moves need weight catching and which need rotation with translation. Then use the right stance. Now there's nothing wrong with pure rotation mechanics, but you should be familiar with translational ones too, to have the full scope of Shaolin techniques at your disposal. Now you know what Yao Bu and Gong Bu are, you can start to use them. But rather than working all of this out from scratch, check out this video, which will take you through 3 applications of a single move and show you how they can be used.